All right, hello, hello. The next stitch we're going to do on our little intro sampler is the stitch that I believe is the most maligned of all the stitches. For some reason, I know why. It can be kind of a pain and it's hard to get right, but the French knot is a stitch that gets a lot of flack. And I love the French knot. And in fact, I love to use the French knot in a very extra way. So this is one of the drop cloth samplers, and I have used so many French knots to fill in these ice creams, and I love it. I love mixing colors and fading from one color to another and using so many French knots, you can't tell where one starts and the other one ends. So I hope that the way I show you how to do a French knot makes it so it's not so intimidating for you, and so it's a little easier. And these little dots around the heart on this sampler are the French knot areas. So one thing I want to keep in mind, or I want you to keep in mind as we do a French knot, is that you cannot make a bigger circumference of knot by adding more wraps around the needle. A French knot will stop getting thicker at one point and will just start getting taller, and then it gets messy looking. So I find that 2 or 3 wraps around the needle is kind of the max you want to do. And if you want to do larger French knots, use larger thread. So use more strands of 6-strand embroidery floss, or double your pearl cotton, or use a thicker pearl cotton. So if you want big knots, you need to use bigger thread. Another thing that might help is to use a milliner's needle instead of an embroidery needle, because a milliner's needle has a straight needle shaft including where the eye is, whereas on an embroidery needle where the eye is, it gets just a little bit fatter. But I don't find that with a 5 embroidery needle I have a difficult time creating my French knots or getting my eye to go through. So your mileage may vary because all of us do everything differently, but those are things that might help you a little bit if you struggle with French knots. One thing I find really helpful with French knots is to put my hoop down and not be holding it while I try to do it, because you really are better served by using both of your hands when you do a French knot. So what I do is I come up where I want the knot to be, and I hold my thread just about 1.5 inches, 2 inches away from my sampler, away from what I'm stitching on. And then I use my dominant hand to hold my needle, and I swoop my thread around, like I said, 2 or 3 times around my needle. And then I'm gonna feed the needle back into my sampler really close to where I came out. And I'm gonna keep tensioning with my non-dominant hand because we don't want everything to get all loosey-goosey. And then I put my hand to the back of the piece and I grab my needle tip and I just start tugging, and I go nice and slow. I don't want anything to mess up. I go nice and slow, and voila, create a perfect French knot. It's so pretty. It looks like a little rose, I feel like. So that was a 3 wrap French knot, and I'm going to do a 2 wrap right here. And you'll see the difference. They're just a little difference in size. And going any bigger, like I said, runs the risk of creating a taller knot, not a fatter knot. So you can go more, but I will say that it won't necessarily be a bigger knot in the way you might want it to be. In the next steps sampler, we are going to do a stitch that is actually a tall French knot laid on its side, called the bullion stitch, but for this one, we're just doing little French knots. It's so fun. I love doing them. Like I said, you can just follow this all the way around and you'll get some really good practice. Once we do these little X's, One thing that Laura Jean did a little French knot in between each X. So it's like X's and O's, which is so precious. But yeah, I hope this has helped you. And I hope that you become a French knot convert too. Thanks so much.